Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie, and I'm the head of front-end development at Behance, which is an online platform for showcasing and discovering creative work. And today I want to tell you a little bit about our journey growing and maintaining a large code base in an era where front-end technology is changing extremely fast. From our original days of using vanilla CSS all the way through the introduction of preprocessors and into our current day CSS and JS implementations. I'll go over some of our trials and tribulations and growing pains, and I'll even air some of our dirty laundry. But perhaps most importantly, how I learned to stop worrying and love the website. The front-end web development ecosystem is moving insanely fast these days. It seems like a new tool or methodology for authoring HTML, CSS, and JavaScript becomes available every other day. Whereas a few years ago, there weren't nearly as many tools with which to work on these things, probably in large part because complex front-end requirements like responsive web development or single-page web apps weren't even concerns anywhere near our radars yet. But now we're seeing huge, rapid advancements in everything from the languages themselves to how we generate basically every single kind of code we write, to the frameworks we use to organize our code, all the way to the build tools that we use to compile, optimize, and serve our code. And because there's always some better or faster tool becoming available, it can feel overwhelming to have to choose and adopt these new technologies all the time. This is hard enough to do on a brand new project where there's no pre-existing code concerns, but it can be especially hard in a large code base or one that has been around for a long time, where when the moment you add something new, suddenly everything else becomes legacy code. And now not only do you have all of this new stuff that you need to learn and maintain, you also have to consider how it's going to play with all of your old code and how or even if you're ever going to update that old code to use this new stuff. And when you compound these technical challenges with the industry pressure that you should be using a certain tool or doing things a certain way in order to be a real web developer, it can create kind of a harsh environment for being able to make the best decisions for your team and for your product and for your users. Which on the code side, that can lead to things like an increase in technical debt or missed project deadlines. But on the human side of things, it can create negative feelings like imposter syndrome or burnout, which are really harmful. So today I want to tell you about how we've dealt with these kinds of challenges at Behance over the years. And if any of you have ever felt like you've experienced anything like these, or might ever experience anything like this, I want you to know you are not alone. So we've been evolving Behance's code base since 2010. When I joined the team 8 years ago, they had just finished a wholesale rewrite of the entire website from scratch. But since then, we have not started over. We've just been working within that same evolving code base through the years. And we've moved through a number of different template engines, CSS processors, JavaScript libraries, and frameworks, you name it. I joined as the 4th developer on the team, and since then, we've grown to be about 40 developers. And in that time, we've faced a really wide variety of challenges. We are also constantly considering which new technologies we can use that'll serve us and the website and the user's needs best. We've had to figure out how to actually implement these new technologies into our existing stack, even when there were massive functional disparities with what was already there. We've had to figure out when to start implementing these things. In particular, we always have to balance our product goals and roadmaps with our developer happiness, as well as the health of the code base. And of course, we've had to clean up any messes we left behind along the way. So there's a ton of opinions out there on the internet on what the best or the right way to build a website is. I'm not here to tell you that there is any one right or wrong way to do any of these things. In fact, I'm kind of here to demonstrate the opposite. What I do want to tell you is about how we've handled these challenges over the years, how and why we've made the decisions that we did, and how they did or did not work out for us. And what I really kind of want to reveal is that no matter how pretty and put together things may seem from the outside, whenever you pull back the curtain, there's no website or process that's ever really as perfect or pretty as it may seem. So first, a little extra insight into Behance's size and complexity. As of today, I counted over 50 pages on our website, which exist in various states of logged in or out or empty states or not. And that's made up of over 500 JavaScript files, roughly the same number of style sheets, and almost 1,000 markup templates. Of course, this number has been in flux over the years as we've removed various pages and features and sections of the site. But the website has also evolved to become a little bit more like a web app as opposed to its traditional individual paged website origins. We now have way more interactive modular components that exist across many pages of the site. For example, there's like a notifications and a messages feed that you can see on any page, and other things like a project pop-up or a user card that can be incited from many different areas of the website as well. But we have very humble beginnings. This screenshot is from the Wayback Machine. There used to be something on the right side, but some things get lost even to the internet. So back in 2010, when I first joined, we weren't using anything except for vanilla CSS to style the website. I would say that our CSS development style back then could be called copy-paste-driven development at this point, because we pretty much had no tools on the front end to help us reduce repetition. We weren't really using any methodologies or naming conventions to help keep our CSS clean. So this is what the website looked like. And I would say that anything on the website that wasn't plain text or a solid color was probably an image. CSS just wasn't nearly as robust as it is today, and we were trying to create something a little more visually interesting than native CSS would allow at the time. But we started to get comfortable using CSS features for visual flair where we could, understanding that the website didn't have to look exactly the same in every single browser all the time. And honestly, I think once our designers realized that we could make any CSS gradient that we wanted without them having to make images for it, I got to become very intimately familiar with this tool. There's like a dozen different ways to make gradients in different browsers, and I definitely was not about to memorize all that syntax. So in time, browser technology is starting to pick up more steam. CSS as a language was advancing. And we were really having a lot of fun with all the cool little visual tricks and treats that we could do with CSS. And we were starting to get comfortable moving away from creating images for things that we were now excited to be able to implement with just native CSS. We had an interesting additional challenge in that we also had all of these offshoots at Behance that were themed galleries for different creative fields, and these white label, almost miniature Behances for schools and organizations, which all use the same markup and styles in JavaScript as the main Behance website, but with an additional style sheet loaded to actually customize them each for their own look or brand. Now, all of these lived within the same one code base, which of course meant that if you changed something on the main Behance website, you had to go and make sure that you didn't break it on any of these other 40+ versions of the website. No big deal. So by now, we had a clear need for a tool that was going to help us with our CSS development. Not only were vendor prefixes starting to slip through the cracks, but thanks to all of these themed galleries and websites, we were absolutely inundated with copy and pasted CSS, where largely the differences were things like font names or color values. Fortunately, by this time, CSS preprocessors were really starting to pick up steam, and they were looking like the perfect tools to help us whip our CSS into shape and make things a bit more dry. Now, the story I'm about to tell is not about the merits of any one CSS preprocessor over the other, but I do want to use it as a real-world example of the messy path to choosing, implementing, and using new tools. So for us, we were debating between Less and Sass, both excellent tools on their own, but we wanted to do proper due diligence and make sure that we picked the right tool for our specific needs. Ultimately, Sass had more compelling implementations and features for our use case. And Compass, on top of that, offered us a ton of extra power that was going to be absolutely perfect for theming all of those sites and for our sprite management. I mean, Sass and Compass were seriously set to improve our lives drastically. The answer for us could not have been more clear. We obviously went with Less. Why would we do that? In our case, we ended up going with less for a couple of reasons. At the time, there was only Ruby Sass, and since Behance was not built on a Ruby stack, it wasn't easy for us to implement or even start using Sass, and it was a little bit intimidating. Since less could easily be compiled by just downloading a convenient little GUI app to your computer, it actually had a really low barrier to entry for us. We were still a very tiny dev team at this point, but this meant that we could start getting a lot of the benefits of a CSS preprocessor much sooner and with way less friction and engineering time than if we had chosen to go with Sass at that point. It afforded us another interesting benefit as well, in that we were actually able to use less as a proof of concept that implementing a CSS preprocessor was a worthwhile investment. The time it took to get it up and running for everyone to use paid off drastically in development time and development improvements down the line, which meant that we were able to get more team buy-in for actually adopting Sass, as well as negotiate for the development time that we needed to do so and make the switch to the tool that we ultimately felt would serve us best. But our journey does not end there. Although we had decided that the higher investment in setting up Sass was worth it, we did have to cut some corners to get there. To complicate things, we were now dealing with the dreaded technical debt of working in a code base that had partially vanilla CSS and partially less syntax, and now we would have to spend the time to convert that all into Sass. And we still didn't have a tech stack that could compile Sass for us. But what we could do was install Ruby and Sass on each of our individual computers and compile and commit the Sass and CSS to our repositories from there. Now, we violated a lot of web development best practices by compiling CSS on our own machines instead of by using a build tool within the tech stack. And we were committing an even worse crime of actually committing compiled code to our repository. I seriously doubt you'd ever find a medium think piece advocating for this kind of implementation. And it gives me some anxiety to admit on stage in front of you all that we were committing such an egregious violation of best practices by having literally hundreds of compiled CSS files in our repository. But on the flip side, I also cannot overstate how much benefit we were getting by having Sass available to us in this way. For what sounds like a nightmare situation on the surface, I have to say, for the most part, actually worked really well for us. Suddenly, we were able to build our themed galleries and white-labeled websites in a fraction of the time, which meant that we were helping our users in our mission to give more exposure to creatives. We were able to do it with way less code than before, which meant that now our code base became much easier to understand and maintain. Although committing compiled code is considered a bad practice, for a large, complex code base with a lot of interdependencies, it actually ended up giving us extremely clear visibility into the reach that any single change actually was having. And the last cool thing is that we suddenly had tools that could do some grunt work for us. For example, this meant that our designers could focus on working on and designing things that actually mattered, rather than spending their time doing menial tasks like stitching sprites together. So in this case, we were able to find a balance between a subpar technical implementation and overwhelming developer and designer happiness, as well as code health by reducing a lot of the technical debt in our CSS. But what happens when you need a tool that doesn't really seem to exist yet? Around this time, we started working on a new product. It was a single-page web app for task management we called Action Method Online. Being that it was a completely brand new product and totally different from Behance, we were starting from scratch, and we had an excellent and rare opportunity to try out new technologies. And we got to do this without having to worry about retrofitting it into any existing code. Now, I think we chose less for this one because of the timing, but on the JavaScript side, we ended up making the decision to write our own JavaScript MVC framework, which we called nbd.js. And we built it at a time when actually Angular and Backbone were extremely popular, well-established frameworks. So why would we bother writing our own? Well, if you look at this timeline, we were actually doing this at a time when there weren't a ton of alternative options, or the ones that were out were kind of new. Adopting a young technology in a product that you anticipate and hope is going to live for years is kind of a non-zero risk move. Now, I'm not saying that writing your own framework or using an existing one is better or worse than the other, but for the size of our team and the needs of our product at the time, being able to iterate on our own front-end framework was just precisely what we needed at the time. And what ended up happening is that Action Method Online became a really good proving ground for our JavaScript framework. Because it was born and forged for specific interactive and data-driven purposes, we were actually able to apply the techniques and practices that we learned in Action Method Online back on Behance. We were able to start using some of the more complex features of this framework for uploading and editing features that we were starting to add to Behance as well. So by this time, Behance was evolving from its static website roots to become more responsive and a bit more modular. But executing this kind of huge paradigm shift was a tremendous undertaking for us. There was literally nothing about how the site was built to that point that was conducive to being responsive. The way we built the site layout was completely rigid. The existing design was not immediately adaptable to smaller screen sizes. And we were still lacking the tools on the front end that we needed to clearly structure and implement the kind of responsive functionality and modularity that we really wanted to. So we knew we wanted to make the website responsive, but despite the challenges in place by the existing foundation, we knew a full rewrite of the website was simply out of the question. It was a huge website, and it would have taken far too long. So we continued working on Behance. We would add new features and convert the site over to be responsive page by page. And we used our JavaScript framework, NBD, for any new code that we were creating. And then we would update any existing areas of the site to use it as needed also, whether it was because that page was due for maintenance or any other kind of update. So both Sass and NBD carried us all the way into 2015 when we started work on another brand new single-page web app. This time it was a website builder called Adobe Portfolio. And it stood to be the most complex single-page web app that we've created to date. We had a ton of new technical challenges on Portfolio that we had never had to deal with before, even in our previous single-page web app. What we wanted to do was build a full GUI, what you see is what you get editor, where by using one of any literally hundreds of customization dialogues, you could make a change to your website and see it reflected in the editor in real time. We needed to do this all while maintaining an editor Chrome that needed to not interfere or intersect with user customizations in any way. So we started building Portfolio with NBD, but building and maintaining a framework is not without its risks and downsides either. And by now, we'd been starting to feel some of the growing pains of actually using our own homegrown framework. It was originally built by just one of our developers and maintained by only a couple more. So this meant that it didn't move particularly fast. It meant that other open source frameworks were moving at a much faster rate. It also meant that it was much more challenging for new hires to learn it. Documentation on it was sparse because the developers who knew how it worked were busy developing, whether it was the framework or for new features for our websites. And the universe of resources to get help with it was scoped entirely to an extremely small portion of our dev team, which then unfortunately made it hard for anyone who needed help to be self-sufficient. On the flip side, popular open source frameworks came with the benefit of way more active and visible communities to tap into for help, which not only means that you have a way bigger pool of resources to get help from, but it also means that there is a community that you can give back to when you solve a specific challenge or interesting problem yourself. So by then, it was easy enough to acknowledge that our homegrown framework was no longer really the best tool for our team or for the new types of products and features that we were building. After spending some time on Portfolio's development, we turned our attention back to Behance. And in the time that we had been building Adobe Portfolio, our designers had been working on designing a whole new look and feel for the entire Behance website. And we wanted this to make a big splash. We wanted it to be a release where the look and feel of the entire website would change for our users all at once. And despite this, once again, we still knew that starting the whole thing over from scratch was simply not going to be an option for us. We'd adopted modular JavaScript with require.js and attempted to scope and componentize our CSS as much as possible using BEM. But the truly scoped nature of CSS and JS was becoming impossibly enticing for our increasingly modular websites and web apps. So with a big overhaul on our plates, the time was once again ripe for us to look for new technology. Now, in the same way that the industry at large has a lot of opinions on the best tools to use, so does any individual given dev team. So what we did to figure out what was going to work best for us is we would hold group discussions, lunch and learns, different knowledge sharing sessions for anyone who was interested, where we would discuss the pros and cons and the merits of different JavaScript frameworks or CSS and JS solutions. And then when we could get some kind of agreement on which one seemed the most compelling, we would actually try them out by building parts of the website for them, specifically the admin section of our websites, which were just pages that only employees can access for different maintenance tasks. But what it meant was that we could actually start using these things in a near real-world proving ground. So for Behance, we ultimately decided on Vue and CSS modules as our preferred tools. And once again, we continue to use a lot of the same techniques for implementing new technology that we had done in the past. We exclusively built new features using these new tools and frameworks, which meant that they got to be in use immediately. We rebuilt existing UI components, such as buttons and inputs, using these new tools and frameworks alongside their existing implementations, which could then be moved over to different areas of the site as those pages were updated to use Vue as well. And perhaps most critically, we did all of this development behind what we call feature flags. What this is just a check in the code that serves one set of code or another, depending on your user's gatekeeper setting, which means that we could build everything that we needed alongside the existing website without worrying about interfering with it, while also still having the ability to see all of this new stuff in action in a production environment, even before it was ready for its public debut. And so this actually brings us to where we are today. The website is not fully converted to Vue and CSS and JS, but we continue to follow the same practices as we update and develop new features. And actually, as an aside, although we are fairly recently into our transition into Vue, we've actually recently made the decision to switch to React, which I don't have time to go into now, but would be happy to chat with anyone about after this if you want. So if you look at the arc of CSS development over the last 8 years, it has changed drastically. In 2010, our biggest concerns were around perfecting the slickest CSS gradient and getting the website to look pixel perfect to the mockups that the designers gave us. But by 2018, not only are we concerned with how the website looks, but we also have to think about how to optimize our code for the least repetition, for the best browser performance, for how it functions in the most browsers and devices that I think we've ever had to deal with. Since the CSS has become more closely intertwined to our JavaScript and markup in modern frameworks than ever before, our concerns are no longer isolated to the CSS itself. And because JavaScript technology and frameworks move so fast too, we end up having a much bigger and more robust ecosystem that we need to have a deep understanding of. Front-end development is hard. Front-end engineering is hard. But I encourage empathy in your decision making and interactions around it. Every technical choice is relative, and there is no right or wrong way to build a website. So, in case the example so far didn't illustrate the beautiful, unique, messy path that web development can take, I'm going to air a little bit of Behance's dirty laundry In case any of you have ever felt bad about the skeletons in your codebase's closet, maybe this will help you feel like you are not alone. Hopefully this is also therapeutic for me. So the first one is that we're actually still using 3 different templating engines across the website, which is absolutely a relic of the transitions that we've made over time. And depending on what page you're viewing, you might actually be seeing all 3 of them in action all at once. This just so happens to be the very first page you see when you log into our website. I searched our codebase for some to-dos because I figured there could be some fun stuff in there. And I immediately came across this one in the head tag of part of our website. It says, to-do. There's a lot of stuff included here that is just unnecessary. Cool. That sounds bad, and also isn't particularly actionable. But I had never noticed this before, so I checked the Git blame because I was curious to see how long this had been a problem for. OK. So while I was looking through the to-dos, I thought, OK, I might as well actually clean up some of them while I'm in here. So I found this one, and it says, to do, remove after statistics are fixed. So OK, I found this in the CSS for our notifications, and honestly, I could not figure out what statistics has or ever had to do with our notifications. So I checked the blame on this one also. Still no idea. So here's a little bit of a longer one. This one says to do. This is due to Chrome 43.0.2357.65, introducing a phantom subpixel width enlargement on parent containers. Remove when fixed. So OK, that's a nice descriptive to-do, although it's not immediately clear why a width property is a bad thing here. That seems fine to me. But whatever, this is helpful information. So let's see if Chrome has updated at all since this was written. I went to Wikipedia to check when this specific version of Chrome was released, over 3 years ago. But OK, let's see what version Chrome is even up to. Cool. I left that one alone also. We have a page on our website that we never made responsive. It's not even like it doesn't get traffic. People visit this page. Granted, it's not the most popular part of the website, but we just quite simply never prioritized it. And finally, my personal favorite. If you recall, I said how we started committing compiled CSS to the repo way back in 2011. Yeah, well, we did that for over 5 years. And we only stopped doing it about 1.5 years ago, very long after a lot of viable solutions had already become available. Talk about embarrassing. So if it sounds like I'm saying our website is kind of messy and imperfect, good. That is what I'm saying. But ultimately, I'm actually proud to say that I work on Behance, even now that you all know how the sausage is made. It's not perfect, but the difference between not perfect and bad is all in how much you focus on it. The closer you examine something, the worse it seems. But everything that we've built is the result of hard work and smart ideas and great teamwork. I consider myself extremely lucky to work with a driven and compassionate group of people who care deeply about the work that they create, the products that they're building, and the impact that it has on the lives of the people who use it. And ultimately, these are the things that I think really make our industry what it is. And these are the values that are way more important than any of the latest frameworks or tools or technologies or any pristine or perfect code base. Thank you.